Introduce myself as well. So I'm a street outreach counselor with Streets to Homes. I've been doing this for close to 2 years now. And yeah, so we work from a housing first perspective, but we also help clients with their immediate needs as well, which is some of the stuff that I'll be going through today. Just some of the stuff that we will need for all housing applications, because whether you're applying for permanent subsidized housing, transitional housing, or whatever the case may be, most likely all of these documents you'll need to have in hand anyway. So it's probably beneficial to have all of them when you start working with the client anyway, because chances are it'll come down the road sooner or later for when you're doing the housing applications with them as well. So what I'll be talking about today is just going through primary ID, just talking about the importance of it, what primary ID actually is, and the ID review process. Income verification forms. So whether your client is getting income from benefits like OW or ODSP, or if they're on pensions, I'll be going through that process with you as well. The notice of assessment, making sure that clients have up-to-date taxes, where they can get their taxes done. And then the intake form and the assessment form, because you'll need to capture what the client is in terms of their tenancy, their housing ability, and different options and different things that they may have as clients that may affect their housing bottom line as well. Okay, so with identification, primary ID is not only important for housing application, but for clients to have as well in all aspects of life. So even if a client does have a photocopy of their ID, having a hard physical copy is always necessary. For example, just something as simple as applying for a bank account. A client may not want to have copies of ID, have their ID on hand just because they may have a history of losing them. But even if they don't have it themselves, having accessibility to a live hard copy of it is essential, because chances are there won't be places that are taking photocopies of ID for certain things anyway. Process can take longer than expected, especially if born in Alberta, and I'll mention that in the next slide, in the next few slides as well. Because just certain provinces have different application processes with it. And if a client is not born in Canada, getting primary ID with it is a bit more complex as well. So the fact that if you meet with a client and they don't have ID to begin with, should be something that you start with them in the first few times that you meet with them, just to get that process started. The process isn't complex, it just takes time. So the actual process of going through the application itself is very, very simple. It can all be done through a phone call now, because now they don't have the pop-up clinic shops. They just handle everything over the phone. So you can just call the phone. You can just call the phone number when you're with the client, and you're able to do everything over the phone. And then you're able to complete the application just like that, as opposed to sending them to an actual location where they would actually have to go to and do the application like that within a specific time frame as well. So primary ID identifies both who you are and your status in Canada. So these are the primary identification examples. So a valid a Canadian birth certificate, a valid Canadian passport, native status card, refugee claimant document, permanent resident card, Canadian citizenship certificate card, and a verification of status document. Okay, so the actual ID reapplication process itself is through paid ID. So all you need to do really is call the paid ID clinic when you're with the client, ask to speak to an ID worker, and then they'll do the application with you over the phone. It takes 4 to 8 weeks for you to get the application done, depending on where the province, where in the Canada the client is born. If you need to necessarily ask for both a birth certificate and a health card application as well, as paid ID does both of those applications. And health card, obviously for health reasons, it's a good source of photo ID, just because we know that the Ontario photo ID, it costs money, and so with the passport as well. So if they need some sort of photo ID, the health card would be a good way for that to be done, and it's free to be done over the phone. So get that paid ID consent form completed as well. So along with a copy of the PowerPoint and the other forms I have throughout the presentation, the paid ID consent form should be included with you to get it as well. And all you need to do is just get the client to sign it. And so that way you are able to pick up the ID on the client's behalf. So that way the client does not necessarily have to go and get the ID themselves. You are able to handle it on their behalf and get it from them and get it signed and handle all the specificities with the ID itself. If the paid ID clinics do ever open up, it's something where the client will need to go in person. However, you could obviously help escort them there if they need to be. However, I hope, honestly, they don't go back to the pop-up clinics, because this ID process over the phone has been a hell of a lot easier than it's been to make sure that clients go to specific places at certain times, because they may be fixated on that one location. And if the one location is once a week, if they miss it on a Tuesday, they're not going till next Tuesday, as opposed to going to other locations that are happening throughout the week. So with this phone number, you can call them any day of the week that they're open, and then you're able to do the ID over the phone. So I mentioned Alberta having a specific application process. Don't ask me why, I'm not too sure, but if a client is born in Alberta and they don't have anybody in Alberta who can guarantee who they are in terms of ID or have any, basically source as a guarantor, the client who is born in Alberta will need to first do an application for a health card and then do an application for their birth certificate. It needs to be done that way. I'm not too sure why it's been that way since I've been working with Ontario Works since, I don't know, like since earlier in the 2010s or so. And it's just been that way ever since then. It's the only province that does it that way, where you can't do both at the same time. You need to do one for the health card, which can do their photo ID, and then you can do the birth certificate after the fact. So if a client is born in Alberta and they don't have ID and they don't have a guarantor in Alberta who can guarantee who they are, it's just going to be a longer process. And unfortunately, there's nothing really that you can do about it. But all you can do is just let the client know that because it's a long process, it might be beneficial for them to do it within the first time or two meeting with you, so that way you can get this process started. Okay, so if a client is not born in Ontario, but they still don't have ID, then you'll still be calling the paid ID clinic, but you'll be doing a verification of status application. So it's the same process. Ask to speak to an ID worker, give the client the phone, they'll go through the process with the ID worker over the phone. So with the consent form, the worker may be able to go to the ID clinic itself, which is 336 Danforth Avenue, just right at the corner of VP and Danforth. And we may have to sign the application there, or bring the application to the client to sign themselves, or if it's possible, see if you can have them email you the contracts. That way you're able to print it at whatever office that you're at, and then you're able to do it that way, and then scan it and fax it, or fax it back to the paid ID clinic, so that way they're able to send off the application. If for some reason address needs to be mailed, just please ensure that you use an address that you can safely access. With Streets to Homes, we always use our Shark address at 129 Peter Street. So for some reason, something does need to be mailed and they need an address to be given to, that's always the ID that we need to do as well. So we will give that address to the clients that we need to give it to if we need to get a piece of mail that has to be mailed. So I know VAW is very specific in terms of their addresses that they have. So hopefully there's somewhere that you guys are able to safely give an address for, so that either you or the client are able to access it to complete the application. So clients that are born abroad will most likely need to apply for a second piece of ID that can show their physical appearance. So when I mentioned the primary ID parts with verification of status, it's just a document that shows what their legal status in Canada is. It doesn't have any physical picture of them, which is where the health card would come into play with it. So if someone is not born in Canada, it's best to get the VOS and the health card application done at the same time, so that way all criteria is met with them, so that way there's no run-in in terms of housing application stallings or anything like that. All right, so that's just an example of what the paid ID consent form looks like. I tried to make this as big as possible. Like I said, you guys should have a copy of it when hopefully when the presentation is done there, but it's pretty straightforward. You just have to have the client sign the bottom, and then identify what piece of ID you guys are going to go get for them. Okay, so income verification. So just like anywhere else where you're looking for housing, if you're paying rent, they need to know that you can obviously afford to pay the rent that you're going to. So having income verification is very important for that very reason itself. Try to get it as soon as you can, just because, like I said, whenever housing opportunities arise, that might be something that's critical for them. And most people on this call know how sporadic the housing opportunity is and how housing can come and go. So having all the documents you need as quickly as possible is always a great thing to be doing as well. So with the income verification, try to have as much detail as possible in the income verification form. So how long the client has been on OW or ODSP, the method of how they receive the payments, whether it's a check, direct deposit, if they have the OW or ODSP reloadable cards. Maybe sometimes they give a breakdown of the monthly payments of what it actually gets. So if the client gets $800, sometimes it's basic needs, sometimes it's special diet, transportation, whatever the case may be, just making sure they have a breakdown of that as well. And then the worker's information as well, so that way you can get in contact with the OW or ODSP worker as you need to. If the client already knows who the worker is, that's great. Then you can introduce yourself and get consent on file, so that way you are able to facilitate this with the OW or ODSP worker as well. Explain to the worker who you are and that you're helping them to secure permanent housing. So that way next, when you do find housing, eventually you'll be able to talk with the worker later on, and you'll be able to have that connection already in place with them. You can let them know that you're requesting an income verification form, and potentially you can also get a copy of their T5s as well, because you'll need to do that to get their taxes as well. The ODSP offices have general emails if for some reason the client doesn't know who the worker is. So I gave an example in here. So if a client is on ODSP and they're at Wellesley Place and they don't know who their worker is, you can send an email to the general email there at odsp.wp@ontario.ca. And I believe it's all similar. It's all similar as well for the other ones as well, whether it's Malvern or there's a few other ODSP places as well. If the email is not responded within a timely manner, maybe speak to your supervisor, see if you can escalate to see if they can reach management at that office, just so you can speak to some sort of caseworker that's there, just so you can get the help that you need with the client. If a client is on OW and they don't know who, and they know their office, but they don't know their worker, they can call 311 and be directed to the TES office that is, and they can speak to a support assistant there who can transfer them to the appropriate worker. If the client doesn't know their office at all, you can call the general number 338-8888 and then follow the prompts to be go to the TES service and get the information through them as well. So the workers will need to press option 3 once they call that number there to get to TES. With internet access, clients can access and apply online for My Benefits and check their status, and they can see their file standings as well. If they're active, they're on suspend. If they have any active overpayments as well, just so they can get a feel and status about how their file is. Okay, so this is an example of what an income verification form would look like. Once again, I tried to make this as big as possible. Can you guys all see this? You guys able to see it pretty well? All right, okay, cool. So yeah, so as you can see, it has the address of the client and the member ID, has a breakdown of what their monthly payments are, has how they receive their monthly payments, they get it by check, and it has the worker's information there. Any information, please call me at whatever the worker's name is. Sincerely, the worker. This form here pretty much encapsulates everything you would need to know about your client from an income perspective. What they get on a monthly basis. So if you can get your income verification forms to look something similar to this, it pretty much covers everything you need to know, because sometimes it might not have too much details, and the housing workers may want to see that the client doesn't have any assets or anything like that. Or if a client says they get a check, they may say, well, do they have a bank account as well? This payment here shows that they get this paper here shows that they get their income payments by check here. So if they have anything else, it's due to everybody. So you can just go by what the information is given. So with this here, this income form is pretty straightforward and detailed in terms of what the client gets. Okay, so obviously not everybody is on OW or ODSP, right? So sometimes we have clients that are on pensions. If your client is receiving pension, just ensure that they're making as much as they can. I'm not going to begin to get into all the pensions because there are just so many. So if your client is getting pensions, just get into the details of what the pension is and just look them up for yourself, so that way you can hopefully try to see and maximize whatever it is that they're getting as well. So the phone number there is the direct line to Pensions Canada. So all you would need to do is just call that number there. Make sure you have the client with you because you'll need to have consent because Service Canada, if you thought City of Toronto was old school, Service Canada is like, it's in the Middle Ages right now in terms of the consent. So you need to make sure you have them with you at all times, just so that way they know who it is that they're speaking to in the proper way to get the information that you need. If you're going to be working with a client long term, you can get the consent on file, but even that is a bit of a process itself. So like I said, it might just be best to each time you need to call Pensions Canada, just have the client with you just so they can give the consent over the phone. So bank statements are not enough. So a lot of times people may just need to think if they give a few months of bank statements with the pensions that are there, that would be consistent and it can show what they get on a monthly basis for their pensions. But I've tried this method and it hasn't really worked. Because in terms of the RGI method for their calculations, I think each type of pension may differentiate or may have an effect on what the RGI calculation actually is. So whatever the pension your client is getting, you'll need to have a breakdown of actually what the pension is in the money that they get from each of those specific pensions. So that way they have it as well. So I can show you an example of what that looks like. So you can see here, it just has a monthly breakdown of what the client would be getting for a monthly basis for it. So you can see that they, for their CPP, they get $213 right here. They get $613 for their OAS, and they get gains for another $805 there. So you can see the monthly breakdown. And once I was able to get this information, then the housing application was able to go through. So that's why I brought up the bank statements, because I tried that method. I tried the method of going to one of those cash money places and making sure that they had the breakdown of all the cash checks, but that still wasn't enough. They wanted to have the exact breakdown with it. So if you call Pensions Canada, hopefully you're able to get that. Okay, so notice of assessment. So getting taxes completed will make sure that the client maintains their RGI housing eligibility. So even if it's not something for clients to get into RGI housing, it'll be something for clients to maintain their RGI housing. So if you guys are able to get the taxes done prior to, it'll at least be a stepping stone for something that the client will need to do on a regular basis anyway. And it's just something for good practice for them to have as well, because just like you and me, clients will need to file their taxes when they need to as well. The money for the client is not deductible from other pensions and benefits and stuff. So it's just more money for the clients to do at the time, right? So we all know that different clients are hurting in terms of their finances at different times. So whenever tax season comes around, it just might be something beneficial for them to do. And depending on what their situation is, they may qualify for those monthly GST checks of like $100-something or whatever the case may be. So if they're getting their basic needs and they get another extra $100 just for doing their taxes, I'm sure that's something that they'd be willing to go through as well, right? So just like I mentioned earlier, when you call your the OW or OWSP worker for the income verification forms, you should call them to get the T5 replacements if the clients don't already have them, just because you'll need that information anyway when you do the notice of assessment. And I found that when you do and you help clients complete their taxes, it actually creates a sense of empowerment, because it actually has them completing something that is not only that it's important, but that's something meaningful to them, and they reap the benefits of something that they have, right? And it's pretty immediate, and it's something that is beneficial to them as well. It's not like it's something where just in terms of from a need standpoint, because at this point they all need finances. So if they're able to help them with that as well, then that's all the more empowering to them. And I felt that the clients have always been beneficial from that. So I've included this in the handouts for you guys as well. It's just a list of free tax clinics, free year-round tax clinics that clients can go to. So even if they aren't able to get their taxes done in April or whenever the case may be when they're supposed to be done, they can call any of these numbers here and they're able to go and get their taxes completed there. So just give the places a call in terms of what their operations are and if they have appointments and everything, then you're able to do that as well. It's a two-sided page, so it should be about like 8 or 9 options throughout the downtown core that should be able to help clients do their taxes. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to be talking to you guys today about is just doing the intake assessment. I just find it's a great way to encapsulate the housing history and the potential tendency of what your client is going to be doing. It helps build rapport. You get to know your client a little bit better, not only from a housing standpoint, but from a personal standpoint as well, right? Because especially if we're not necessarily just helping them from a housing standpoint, if we're helping them from their immediate needs, we get to know the client a little bit better than just what their housing options are. And we can sort of get to see, because the client may tell you that they're housing ready and they can live in this environment and that environment. But as you speak to them and you get to know them a little bit better, and they tell you about some of the history and some of the stuff they've been through and what they're going through now, you can sort of get a little bit feel of how you actually think the client would be and what you think that the client would be best beneficial for their housing perspective and what they could do moving forward. It's important to keep the intake form up to date. And it's a great help, and it's a good way to get the key aspects about other things, like I said, like the physical, mental health, and potential substance use and everything like that, potential tendency. It's also going to be useful for supports after the fact. So at Street Still Homes, we not only help people from a housing perspective to get housing, we help them maintain and keep their housing. So we do a lot of follow-up supports and follow-up workers referrals once clients do get housed. So if any of you guys are able to do that as well, having an up-to-date intake and assessment form with key details about your client as well is all the beneficial for it as well. So that way they get the proper help they get after the fact, because moving in is just as overwhelming as being homeless as well, because especially if they've been homeless for a certain time or they're coming from a certain situation. And I don't have to tell VAW workers about dealing with the traumatic experiences that you guys go through. So if a client is dealing with any of those situations, you want to make sure that when they find housing, that they can maintain and stabilize their housing as best as they can, and making sure that they have successful tenancy throughout the time that they're living there. Once again, I included this as well. It's about a 3-page document. It encapsulates everything that you would want to talk to them about. This is just the first page of it here, but it has different things about them. It has their physical and mental well-being. It talks about any substance use they have, any legal issues, or any, if they use emergency services, like if they have to access like the emergency or ambulance, or if they go to the hospital often. All of this can be encapsulated with the intake form. And as long as you keep it up to date, it'll give a good perspective as to who the client is, not only for yourself, but for whoever else is going to be working with the client in the future. Yeah, so that is about it.
Thank you all for having us here. My name is Catherine Lee. So actually, Kriti, I think you're the only person in a very long time that's pronounced my last name correctly. So it actually is Lease, but I always say Liss because it's a lot easier for folks. So that was pretty interesting to hear it pronounced that way. I was like, oh yes, somebody got it, yay. But anyways, so yes, we're here today to talk about the housing allowances and the Canada-Ontario housing benefit. So I'm going to be speaking about the housing allowance program first, and then Richard will be speaking about the Canada-Ontario housing benefit. Okay, so, sorry, Richard, next slide. Okay, so what is a housing allowance? So it is a benefit that reduces an individual's housing costs. We have housing allowance benefits in the amounts of $250, $400, $500, and $600 per month. The housing allowance is for a particular household rather than a specific housing unit, and it is portable within Toronto. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a background. The housing allowance program is funded through the Ontario Priorities Housing Initiative, and it is for individuals who are homeless. Around last year, same time actually, around April of last year of 2020, we were able to allocate 50 housing allowances for the Violence Against Women Housing Allowance stream. Recently, our numbers, we have about 11 out of those 50 have been taken up. So we have about 39 remaining housing allowances under this stream. Clients are referred in through designated VAW partner agencies. And we actually have, through the VAW coordinating referral body, that is how we receive our referrals. So there is a designated site lead through the VAW network who sends these referrals to our team for processing. The Housing Allowance Program is a shared administration with the province. And what that means is anytime we upload or send an application to the province will actually administer the payments. So whether the payment goes to the landlord or to the client, the payments are being administered through the province, and they are responsible to process renewals. And I'll talk about the renewal process a little bit later. The funding for these housing allowances under the Ontario Priorities Housing Initiative is available until March 31st, 2022. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Bridging Grant Program. So we also made available with these 50 housing allowances, we made bridging grants available for clients. And what a bridging grant is it provides financial assistance to housing allowance clients to bridge a new tenancy. The bridging grant is a one-time grant up to $2,500, and it helps to secure a unit by paying for first and last month's rent. One thing to note here is if a client is on OW or OWSP, they must access HSF first. Bridging grants are only available for clients who do receive a housing allowance, and it is at the time of the housing allowance application that a client can apply for the bridging grant. Next slide, please. Okay, so housing allowance program eligibility criteria. So a lot of these program criteria, they're actually provincially set. So the client must have status in Canada. They have to file previous year's income tax return. They must be a resident of Toronto, and they are not currently receiving RGI assistance. Next slide, please. They also must be paying more than 30% of their adjusted family net income towards rent. They cannot have arrears with a social housing provider, or if they do, they must have an active repayment plan. And they must not own a home suitable for year-round occupation. And next slide, please. Okay, so these are our household income limits. And essentially, if a client is applying for the program, if it's one household occupant, their household income limits must be below $40,000. If there's two occupants in the household, the income must be below $47,000 and so forth. And this is net income and the yearly household income limits. So again, when a client is applying for the housing allowance, they must fall below the household income limit there. And okay, so the maximum rents allowable. So these are the AMRs that are set by the province. However, we do have opportunity to increase these, and recently we did put forward a business case to increase these AMRs last year. We increased them by about 7% for each amount, and the business case was approved by the province. So yes, AMR, average market rent, correct, yep. Sorry, I should have said that. So it's a little bit different than other AMRs that are set usually by like bedroom size, like 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. Our AMRs are set by occupants. So one person, the maximum allowable rent should be below $1,512. Does net house, oh, I think I saw a question, but maybe I'll be able to get to those a little bit later, sorry. Okay, and then the site lead. So we do have a site lead who is the coordinator through the VAW network that coordinates with the VAW partners to select eligible candidates for the program. Our team will review, approve, and submit the referrals for eligible candidates using the online referral form. So the site lead does that part, and our team reviews these referrals. The site lead will liaise with the housing allowance team if there are any issues related to the referral or applications. Sometimes there'll be sometimes spelling mistakes, so the team will contact the site lead to make some of those corrections. Or maybe there's a discrepancy between what's on a document that's been submitted, like their income document, and what's been entered on the referral form. So there's a lot of back and forth sometimes with the team and the site lead. And next slide, please. Okay, so this is the annual renewal form that I was going to speak about. I referenced a little bit earlier at the beginning of the presentation. So participants, in order to maintain ongoing eligibility for a housing allowance, they must renew their applications annually. And the benefit year for the housing allowance program is from July 1st until June 30th. So that is the funding period. That being said, in March, participants are usually sent a reminder notice to make sure that they update and file their taxes. So if there's any type of, if they're moving at any time, because it is a shared administration with the province, even if a client moves or there's changes to, perhaps like their marital status, they must contact the province and advise them if they are moving, if there's any changes to their household. However, at the renewal period of time as well, they should advise if there's any changes as well. So March, they'll get a reminder notice, make sure you file your taxes, make sure you're updating your file. In May, participants are mailed the renewal forms from the province. And in June, they must return the renewal form before June 30th. And often we will get a question that, say we have a client who joined the program in May, for example, are they required to submit a renewal form? And the answer is yes. So even if a client is new onto the program in May or June, they will still need to, once they submit their application, they will also need to submit a renewal form. This is a provincial requirement, and unfortunately, we don't have too much flexibility around this piece. And next slide, please. Oh, okay. And so, Richard, I saw some questions that did come up. Should we wait till after to answer those before we jump into COB, or Kriti, maybe you have some insight on what we should do there?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Let's wait till the end of the entire presentation and we'll address all the questions together.
Perfect, that works.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Catherine. My name is Richard Marshall. I'm a housing consultant at the City of Toronto, and I was part of a team that rolled out the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit starting about a year ago this month, so last April. And so that's what I'm going to be speaking about. So just by way of overview, I'll just give you a bit of a general picture of what the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, also known as COB, program is, and then speak a little bit about what the City of Toronto's implementation of the program looked like, what the target groups were, speak a little bit about the benefit levels, and then also the communication and outreach and the application processes that were used. I may touch on the annual renewal process, but really it's the same as the one that Catherine just described for housing allowances. I'll speak a little bit about the outcomes from year one, which has already closed, and give you a bit of a picture of what year two looks like. We're now in the second year of the program. And then finally, just by way of summary, a bit of a comparison of the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit Program with the housing allowance. And then as Catherine and Kriti were saying, we'll have time for questions and answers too. Okay, so the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit Program, similar to the housing allowance that Catherine just described, it's a provincial federal program. It's part of the National Housing Strategy. What it is an income-tested portable housing benefit. It's a 10-year program that was launched April 1st, 2020. Not a great time to launch a program just as the pandemic was getting going, but that's what we had. It ends on March 31st, 2029. Something that's a little different from a lot of previous housing benefit programs is the requirement that recipients must be removed from the centralized waiting list. And the quote down there is just from the government's own materials about the COB. Okay, so the City of Toronto's implementation, in year one, there was a funding allocation, and it was an amount of money. We weren't quite sure how many benefits it would support because we didn't know what the benefit amount would look like. But in the end, it supported just under 1,200 households, so 1,165 benefits. Year 2, which we've just started April 1st of this year, is quite a bit of a smaller allocation. It'll be approximately 250 benefits. And just again, to be clear, it's a federal provincial program, and the service manager's role, that in the City of Toronto's case, it's really identifying, selecting, and verifying eligible households, and then assisting with the application submission to the Ministry of Finance. And just as Catherine described about the housing allowance, the payments, the renewals, all of those pieces of the program are with the province. So the target groups, these were provincially mandated target groups. And the first is victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. And what were used for eligibility criteria are the provincially established eligibility criteria for the SPP, Special Priority Program. Indigenous persons was another target group. And there, in terms of eligibility, what we did is we collaborated with the Toronto Indigenous Community Advisory Board, TCAB, and their member agencies who identified eligible applicants and referred them to the program. Another target group is people with physical disabilities on the centralized waitlist. And the eligibility criteria there was the designation in the Toronto area centralized waitlist of households that required and were waiting for wheelchair accessible or modified units. And then the last group is really what we would call non-targeted, and that's households on the centralized waitlist. And in that case, they were prioritized by oldest application date. But in year 1, there was much greater demand than there was supply. And what happened at one point is we began to put people on a wait list for COB. So in year 2, we're actually working through that COB wait list. Okay, so benefit level. Unlike the housing allowance program that Catherine described, the benefit is not a fixed amount. It's an income-related amount. So really what it is, it's the difference between 30% of a household's adjusted family net income, or if they're receiving social assistance, it's the difference between the shelter allowance and 100% of CMHC average market rent for the area. And I think probably the best way to give you a sense of this, see if I can open this up. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes, Richard, we can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken you to the City of Toronto's Canada Ontario Housing Benefit website. There's quite a bit of information here. The different tabs here, the application process and what goes on after the application. But what I want to show you is the benefit calculator. And what this is I'll go right to it. I'll show you. And I'm hoping it will come up. Here we go. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the first page of it, and it just really describes how it works. One of the pieces is to figure out what size bedroom a household is eligible for. It's fairly straightforward. If it's 1 or 2 people that are a couple, they're eligible for a 1-bedroom. 2 to 3 people, 2-bedroom, and then 3 to 4 people plus 3-bedroom. So now I'm going to go to the calculator. And it's fairly simple. There's just a few blue boxes here and some questions. And what this calculator will do is give a potential applicant a sense of the benefit amount that they can expect. It's just an estimate. The Ministry of Finance is the one that does the final determination of what the benefit is. But we'll just go through a couple of scenarios. So the first question is, does any individual in the household currently receive social assistance? Either Ontario Disability Support Program or Ontario Works. And so for the first scenario, let's say yes. What unit size are you eligible for? Let's say that it's a single person, and we'll select 1 bedroom. And right away, it will introduce the AMR amount. The next is the adjusted family net income. That comes from line 23600 on the notice of assessment. So we can just introduce, I don't know, we'll put 17,000, for example. And then coming down to number 4, the eligible shelter allowance. Let's say it was OWIODSP and it's a single person, so we'll put 497. And let's say they found a unit, the actual shelter costs, rent and utilities are 1,500. So as you can see, the benefit amount is 949, which is basically the difference between their shelter costs and their shelter allowance. Okay, let's see if I can get back. There we go, perfect. So you can see there's a formula that's used, and it's different for each household size. It's different depending on their family income or whether they're on social assistance. Okay, so the communication outreach and the business process for year 1 was a little different than year 2. So I'm just going to outline it here. So the source of applicants is the centralized waiting list. That's where we found, that's where the applicants came from this priority group, victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. And the eligibility criteria, as I mentioned, were the provincially established eligibility criteria for SPP. So the communication, what happened is personal invitation letters were sent out to all eligible SPP applicants by a bulk mail out with some information about the program and links to the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit website and the benefits calculator. And then eligible applicants were directed to call the city's application support center to have their COB application completed and submitted by ASC staff. So some of the outcomes, I think I mentioned, there were just under 1,160 total COB recipients in year 1. And the average benefit amount was about $740 per month. So within that, the SPP priority group, there were just under 90 households received a COB, 89, which was just under 8% of the total. I note too that we did have 18 SPP households withdrew from the program. And typically that's because sometime during the process or at the same time, they perhaps received an RGI offer, and then because you can't be receiving both benefits, they perhaps made the decision to go with the RGI offer instead of COB. Something to note for the SPP priority group, the average benefit amount was considerably higher, about $984 per month. And that was because almost half of the households were 3 to 4 plus people, generally much higher household sizes than the other priority groups. And the overall take-up rate for the SPP stream was just over 8%. Okay, so now we're in year 2. The applicant source, the priority group, and the eligibility criteria are the same, but what we're doing this year is rather than a bulk mail out, eligible applicants are being contacted directly by the Access to Housing team by phone. And also there's an emailed information package. And then eligible applicants will make an appointment with Access to Housing staff, and they'll complete the COB application. So year 2, I think I mentioned it's a much smaller allocation. It's only about 250. But the targets that we're aiming for is we would like to try to get the total take up for the SPP applicants to about 20% or 50 out of the total allocation. That's our goal. The current figures right now, I think I've got here 8. I just was in a meeting where I think there's at least 2 more, so it's up to 10, which is very close to the monthly target that we set for April. And the take-up rate overall is about 24%, which is significantly better than in year 1. So it's possible that the direct contact is working better than the mail-out. Okay, so we're almost done. This is really just a summary, a bit of a comparison between the housing allowance, the Toronto Transitional Housing Allowance Program, and COB. So eligibility criteria, the basic eligibility criteria are really the same. I think Catherine spelled them out about status in Canada, not owning a house suitable for year-round occupation, and not receiving RGI. The benefit amount, a housing allowance is a fixed amount, and there's a few different levels, whereas COB is income related, which is adjusted annually. Based on year 1, it's about $740 per month on average. In terms of portability, which is a great feature of housing allowances and housing benefits, is the housing allowance can be used anywhere in Toronto. The COB can actually be used anywhere in Ontario. It's portable throughout the province. Removal from the centralized wait list is not required for a recipient of a housing allowance. For a recipient of COB, it is a requirement. If you receive COB, you must consent to come off the centralized wait list. For housing allowance program, there is a maximum rent. Those are the tables that Catherine just shared with you. There isn't one for COB. It's because the benefit level is set based on a number of different criteria. There's not really a maximum rent. It's possible that your combination of income and rental amount will result in a $0 benefit. But even if that does happen, the household can remain in the program for up to 2 years, because if any of those elements do change, the benefit can be adjusted. So there's not actually a maximum rent that's been set. The annual renewal process, it's basically the same for both programs as Catherine outlined. And then the program end date currently, at least, for the housing allowance is March 31st, 2022, and for COB, March 31st, 2029. And yeah, now if we could open for questions.
To the next presentation. So I believe Kay should be online. Kay and Nadeem are going to be talking to us about rent geared to income housing and the SPP. So I'll hand it over to Kay.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Great. So Kirti, are you going to be sharing the presentation, or would you like me to?
Hi, Kirti. Kay, if you are okay to share, go ahead, but just in case, if you'd like me to, I have it too.
Sure, I'll try.
We have many backups. We had like 3 backups in case some tech issues happen, so don't worry.
Great.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Thanks, Kay.
Awesome. Okay, I'm not sure, is Nadeem with us before I get started? Hopefully.
I don't see him online yet.
Okay, no worries. We'll get started without him.
Sounds good.
So
Thank
good
you.
afternoon. Thank you for having us and inviting us. Today we're going to give a high-level overview of rent geared to income housing, who can apply specifically for special priority, what documents are required, where to submit the completed SPP application, and how to submit those applications, talk about some legislation changes and upcoming changes to our form, and your role as an agency professional. So to get started, Access to Housing manages a centralized wait list for rent geared to income housing. Subsidy is offered by the City of Toronto to make rent affordable, generally sets the rent at 30% of the household income. There are approximately just over 81,000 eligible households currently on the wait list. The wait list is prioritized by application date, taking into consideration the first priorities, which are survivors of domestic violence or human trafficking, then by homeless and youth, separated families, and terminally ill. The demand for rent geared to income housing far exceeds the available stock. The wait time that we are currently seeing is a minimum of 10 years for certain areas of the city, and for applicants with the special priority eligibility, it can be less than 1 year. Alternative housing providers are also available, including Indigenous housing providers, and that's managed outside the centralized wait list. The eligibility criteria for rent geared to income, applicants or the head of household needs to meet at least these eligibility criteria. So the first would be providing status in Canada. The second, the main applicant is 16 years or older. The household owes no arrears to any social housing provider, example, Toronto Community Housing, and they submit the signed consent and declaration forms. Some examples of status in Canada documents include a Canadian birth certificate, citizenship card, permanent residency card, or refugee approval documents with a valid expiry date. You can find a full list of documents on our website under the How to Apply tab. Who can apply for special priority? So if your applicant that you are supporting is experiencing abuse or human trafficking, if they are an existing household member on the wait list or a new applicant, if they are currently living in rent geared to income housing and experiencing abuse or human trafficking. The HSA has provided us with two definitions. So the first is for abuse, means more than one incident of physical or sexual violence, controlling behavior, or intentional destruction of or intentional injury to property, or words, actions, or gestures that threaten an individual to fear for his or her safety, or trafficking of the member done by any individual. The definition of trafficking means with respect to a member of the household, one or more incidents of recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of the member by improper means, including force, abduction, fraud, coercion, deception, and repeated provision of a controlled substance for an illegal purpose, including sexual exploitation or forced labor. The definition of abuser is also available under the HSA. Abuse is done by any of the following. So an individual who is related to a member or other members of the household, an individual who has been an intimate partner in an intimate partner relationship with a member or any member of the household, an individual whom the member or any other member of the household is emotionally, physically, or financially dependent, an individual who is emotionally, physically, or financially dependent on any member of the household, or an individual sponsoring the member or any other member of the household as an immigrant. How to apply. Complete and submit the special priority application, which can be found on our website. If your client is currently on the centralized wait list, please include their application number on the SPP application. If the applicant is not currently on the rent geared to income wait list, they will need to complete the RGI application. And again, it can be accessed from our city website. The interim process, access to housing is receiving and accepting mail that can be mailed to our address at 176 Elm Street. We also do have a mail drop box. We do have staff that come into the office and will collect the mail from this drop box. We do ask that you do not fax any documents because documents seem to get mixed up or misplaced when they are coming through the fax. So we are encouraging Canada Post or our Dropbox. Completing the application. There are different sections depending on what your applicant is applying for. So for human trafficking, the general information section A and B, including the declaration of human trafficking, needs to be completed. For domestic violence, again, information A and B, and the declaration of domestic violence in section C will be are required to be completed. And for the sponsorship breakdown, again, the general information in section A and B, and under the sponsorship breakdown under section C needs to be completed. For the verification or record of abuse, this is completed by the individual supporting the applicant with their application. So for example, there is a list on the application which includes agencies within the VAW sector, or a lawyer or a doctor, a one-page letter of support outlining the instances of human trafficking or domestic abuse, including timelines, is mandatory for professionals who are not affiliated with the VAW sector or human traffic agencies, or work within the City of Toronto shelter programs. Again, this letter must be on official letterhead and signed and dated. It's also it should be consistent. The consistent author should be the person who is writing the verification or the record of abuse and completing the application and supporting the applicant through this process. The letter should include the applicant's name, the abuser's name, the joint address, and again, there is a full list of accepted professionals for verification on the application form. The required documents for declaration of human trafficking or abuse completed by the applicant. So for proof of joint residency with the abuser, again, not required for human trafficking. And this piece is also completed by the applicant or supplied by the applicant. Copies of documents that prove that the two individuals were living together within the last 3 months. Acceptable documents do include property taxes, utility bills, statements from financial institutions, information from Canada Revenue Agencies, an up-to-date lease or N5 notice, Ontario Works or Ontario Disability Program benefit statements. For sponsorship breakdown, cohabitation documents are not required. If the abuser is the sponsor, they do not have to live together in order to be eligible for the program. However, exceptions may apply, and the City of Toronto staff may contact you just to understand the situation a little bit clearer. If the applicant does receive an adverse decision, they will be given the opportunity to provide additional information within 30 business days of the letter that they do receive. The letter will outline the reasons why the application was denied and the opportunity to provide the additional information that may have been missing. If after this process, if the decision is upheld, the client will also be given the option to request an internal review to ensure that the legislation and the appropriate decision was made with the information that was provided at the time. New information cannot be submitted during the internal review. And this internal review process does apply to all priorities, including terminally ill or the disadvantaged code. There are extenuating circumstances outlined in the HSA that recognizes that clients may not have been aware or have the resources to apply for the program. Applications can be reviewed if they are beyond the 3 months, but are less than 1 year. A statement from the verifier, the person supporting the individual, must outline the reasons why the client didn't apply within the 3-month time frame. Some of those reasons could be, but are not limited to, the applicant is involved in a drug recovery program, they're involved in ongoing counseling, or they're involved in legal proceedings. Your role in supporting your applicant is to ensure that the application is completed on the appropriate form. We have seen where some applications are being submitted to Access to Housing from an application that was developed in 2012. So we do ask that you destroy those applications and use the most recent version on our website. If a binding signature is required, please ensure that it is also in place. That you are submitting all the required documents when you are submitting the application. Please contact the caseworker who reviewed the file and made the decision if you do have any questions. And last but not least, work with your client to review the building selections. Building selections are added after a file is made eligible. And there is a list on our City of Toronto website with all the subsidized listings within the City of Toronto. Wanted to share some upcoming changes. The first set of changes are the legislative changes. So rent geared to income simplification process. This will require all household members over the age of 16 to provide a notice of assessment. This will come into play approximately July the 1st. And a notice of assessment is required to accept offers. Exceptions to this process are students and newcomers to Canada that have been in the country less than a year. The single offer rule will also be playing itself out in the summertime, and we will keep you informed as this also rolls out. The single offer rule will be when an individual expresses interest on a unit, they must take that unit. If they do not take that unit, they will be removed from the wait list. Under special priority, there is an extenuating circumstance that has been built in, and this is around safety concerns. So if your applicant accepts the unit and realizes her abuser or her trafficker are within that area or family members are in that area, that offer can be counted as a withdrawal. Some of the technology updates that we are working on is the launch of the application portal. Hopefully by June, this application portal should be available, but again, we will keep you updated. And we've also updated the special priority form, which we worked with the coordination team to design and develop. The Rent Cafe My Access to Housing training, we're also working with this team to develop some training dates, and we're looking forward to rolling that out in June. And that brings me to the end of our presentation. Is there any questions that I can answer for anyone?
Thank you so much, Kay. That was really helpful and so detailed. So I really appreciate that. And I'm sure those in the audience do as well.